Whew, I didn't get my screen flipped. You got to look at a old face. All right. In case anybody's ever wondering, the reason I don't show my face is I want you to concentrate on the words of the book and not look at this old lady. There's that. Okay, here we go. Welcome back. We are on book number 1, A Healing in Jesus' Name. This is chapter 34, and I will just add the very short epilogue to this. So this is chapter 34 and the epilogue. Jason drove on the way back to Shelley's house while Justin sat shotgun and Ricky, restless and pensive, stretched out in the back seat and tried to rest. All was not well with the universe. He could feel it. Once Jason swung the car into Shelley's driveway, it took only a few minutes to restore her house to its former cleanliness. And Justin pulled out a cell phone. I'll see when the next flight out leaves and get us booked. He frowned at the phone. 18 missed calls. He punched a button. "Where have you been?" a panicked voice asked. "I have been trying to contact you since last night. You know better than running off without letting me know something. Why didn't you answer your cell?" Justin smiled at the dedication of his assistant. "Calm down. Everything's all right. I thought there was an emergency and I had to leave suddenly, but it was a false alarm. And my phone doesn't work up at the cabin, which is where I've been, so I turned it off to save the battery." "Well, this is no false alarm," she shot back. "They granted James special appeal for bail yesterday. When I couldn't reach you or your brother, I contacted some of Jason's friends, and they think James may have taken a flight out. I'm sure I don't need to tell you what that means." Justin made it evident that he grasped the seriousness of the situation. Shelley would be safe with Eric, but they should be told about this new development immediately. And he turned to Jason and Ricky. "James is out. Try your dad on his cell." Ricky shook his head. "You know it won't work out there," Ricky complained as he called his father. "Well, we have to go back," Justin began explaining. "James is free and probably headed this direction. We need to go back and warn your dad." Ricky didn't question it. Quickly, they collected their things and started to head out. "Wait," Ricky said suddenly. He ran back into the house and straight to Bree's room to the bedside table. He pulled the door open, and in an instant, the gold-handled knife was at his side. He jumped in the car. "Let's go." Eric's jovial mood at the local pub began to deteriorate once he glanced down at his watch. Uh-oh, Shelley's going to be hard to deal with on this one. As he stood making apologies about having to leave, he realized he was a little tipsy. Actually, a lot tipsy. Definitely in no condition to drive. He sighed. He was disappointed in himself. This wasn't like him at all. Oh well, sometimes you just have to lighten up, have some fun, and take some chances. Dear Lord, he thought, I'm beginning to think like Ricky. His newest best buddy, Sheriff Carter, drove Eric out to the cabin as he formulated what he'd say to Shelley. He smiled. "She is absolutely adorable when she's mad. I bet I can have her eating out of my hand in 15 minutes, he said with a chuckle. He considered, and then reconsidered. Well, maybe 30 minutes, he thought. The sheriff laid odds with Shelley as he brought the car to a sharp halt on the gravel drive in front of the tiny cabin. "Good luck," he called as Eric gathered his purchases. "We'll have your car delivered." He sped away. Eric stood in front of the cabin and breathed a sigh, picturing Shelley standing in the center of the room, fuming, with her hands on her hips. He weaved his way toward the porch, up the steps, and paused before he opened the door, forcing a pleasant look on his face. He opened the door and stepped inside. Something hard and blunt hit him in the back of the head. Eric fell to his knees, packages scattering across the floor. Boy, she is really mad, was his first thought, but a more sobering realization cleared his dulled brain. And before a second blow could be made, he instinctively turned and raised his arm to block it. He stared into James's hate-enraged eyes. The board glanced off Eric's forearm and crashed to the floor. The whack to the back of Eric's head was causing severe vertigo, and James's hard boot blasted Eric in the abdomen. Eric rolled and struggled to stand, but the vertigo combined with the alcohol was making it difficult to discern up from down. He stumbled forward into James' spinning back kick. It caught him in the temple, and the battle was over before it began. A master defeated, not by his enemy as much as by his own deeds, innocent though they were. Eric had preached many times that only one mistake, one instant of carelessness can cause defeat or possibly fatality. And he'd made the mistake. James dragged Eric's unconscious body into the bedroom. New scene. Shelley slowly opened her eyes. Her heart soared with relief as Eric stood over her, gazing down at her. He'd won. She'd known he would. Yet as she blinked several times to clear her blurred vision, she realized she was wrong. Dead wrong. It was Eric she was looking at, but he was not standing over her. He wouldn't be standing at all if he hadn't been supported by ropes that hung from the ceiling beam. His wrists were not taped with duct tape like hers. Instead, James had used handcuffs on Eric's hands and feet to secure him. Eric's hands were stretched over his head, where the cuffs were looped over a thick rope that was wound around the beam that ran the length of the cabin. His feet were also cuffed and anchored to the wooden floor with large nails that bent over to hold the chains. Shelley raised her head for a better view. His eyes were closed, his head bowed, his shirt was gone. A small trickle of blood ran from somewhere behind his head to the front of his neck and then down his chest. "Eric," she whispered, but he didn't respond. She laid her throbbing head back down. "How?" she asked aloud. "Well, the fact that he was drunk may have had something to do with it," James answered, his tone jovial, "although I'm sure I could have won without the help of the alcohol." Shelley turned, startled by the closeness of James's voice. He was right beside her. Her eyes burned into his. "That's a lie!" James only smiled. "Maybe. Maybe not. The truth has no bearing on the situation, does it? The fact remains, Eric is at my mercy. So, now, we play the game, right?" Shelley closed her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Please don't do this," she begged, her fear getting the best of her momentarily. "Oh, that's fine with me," James said flatly. "We don't have to play the game. I'd just as soon take Eric out and watch him die a slow, painful death. Is that what you've decided?" "No," she answered quickly. "Then you'll play the game?" "Well, how do I know you'll keep your word? If I win, if I do what you ask, how do I know you won't hurt Eric anyway?" James sat down next to her. "Contrary to what you believe or what Eric has told you, I have my own set of ethics, my own code of honor." Shelley tugged at her bindings. "Oh, yeah, this is truly honorable." Anger flashed across his face, but he regained control quickly. "I'll give you an example to prove my honor. Several times during this past year, I could have taken any one of your children from you." She began to tremble. He continued, "I didn't, because children are good and innocent and not responsible for the sins of their parents." "And what are my sins?" she snapped. He stroked her cheek gently. "Your sin, albeit innocently committed, was to become involved with Master Kino. So, now you must pay along with him. But I swear on the lives of your children, I'll keep my part of the bargain. You win the game, Eric goes free. Deal?" With tears in her eyes and terror in her heart, she agreed. She looked up at the man she loved more than life itself, and she wondered how badly he was hurt and how long she had before the game was to begin. James went to Eric, took his pulse, and lifted his eyelids. "Ooh, he's out cold. Let's wake him, shall we?" He circled behind, drawing his knife. What are you going to do?" "Don't hurt him. You said if I played, you wouldn't hurt him." "Well, you can't very well play if he's not awake." "I won't hurt him bad, just enough to wake him. You see, just here, next to the shoulder blade, is a bundle of nerve endings. Slipping a blade in just so can cause a great deal of pain." He pushed the knife into Eric's back, and Eric moaned and lifted his head. "See," James said, "nothing to it." Eric's eyes opened, and he immediately took in the situation. "Shelley," he said, ignoring James's presence and the burning pain in his back, "are you okay, baby?" Shelley turned her gaze to James, unsure if she should answer, but James bent to whisper in her ear, "Oh, the game has begun." "Get away from her," Eric ordered. James stood to face his enemy. He rubbed the blood from his knife, licked his fingers, folded the knife, and shoved it in his pocket as he spoke. "You are hardly in a position to be giving orders." Eric couldn't argue with the statement, but he immediately tried to reason with him. "Listen, James, this has nothing to do with Shelley. Let her go. You don't want her. It's me you want, and you have me. Please let her go. If you need to see me beg, you got it. I'm begging you. James, let her go." James was almost touched by Eric's humility. Almost. I would, Eric. Honest to God, I would, he said brightly. I like her. But she doesn't want to go. She wants to stay. Don't you, Shelley? She looked sadly up at Eric and gazed into his eyes, trying to communicate her immense love to him, trying to make him understand. A James knuckles splitting her lip brought her out of her trance. Leave her alone, Eric screamed as he struggled against his bonds. It's okay, James said, trying to calm him. It's just punishment for not answering a question. She knows she's supposed to be polite enough to answer my questions. Isn't that right, Shelley? Wide-eyed, she nodded. Eric's teeth clenched as he began to understand what Shelley had already been through. Now, answer the question, James continued, refusing to let a question go unanswered. You don't want to leave because there's something you need to do, right? She nodded as tears ran down her face. James sat next to her and picked up the edge of the sheet. There now, he said, as he wiped her tears and cleansed the blood from her mouth. His eyes lingered on her. You sure are a pretty thing, he said with a smile. He took her face in his hands. She immediately began to struggle, but he held her fast while he kissed her. There's no use in struggling, Shelley. There's no way out of it for you. He stood to face Eric with a smile. I swear, Eric, you are one lucky man, because she tastes about as sweet as anyone could. But today, my friend, your luck has run out, and mine has just come in, he grinned, raising his eyebrows. Eric tried again to gain control of the situation. She's never done anything to hurt you. Please, James, leave her alone. James ignored him. He knelt over Shelley, pulling out the knife and raising his favorite toy as he again stroked its blade with his fingertip. Shelley's breaths became labored as her fear mounted. He slid the knife under the material of her shirt and began removing her clothing. It sliced through the cloth easily. Once he'd removed every stitch, he neatly put the knife away, and Shelley felt a relief of sorts that he'd only wanted to use the knife to undress her. But what was coming? The room began to spin, and there was a loud roar in her ears. She looked over at Eric. He was straining against his bonds and yelling something, but she couldn't hear what he was saying. She looked back at James, who was grinning, and then he was on her. He was so heavy. There was nothing she could do to stop what was happening to her. Nothing but pray, she thought. And she did immediately. Oh, please, help me, dear Jesus, she whispered inside her head. And something strange happened. An immediate feeling of calmness and peace came over her, and a question popped into her head. What had she learned? She realized she'd learned a great deal. It was just a body. He could and would do as he pleased with it, just as Eric had once said, there's always going to be someone who's bigger and stronger. Yet he couldn't touch her mind. Her mind and spirit were free. Eric, too, had been praying, and he stopped struggling, resigning himself to the fact that he couldn't help her physically. Shelley, listen to me. Remember, it's just a body. You can leave it. You can go to another place, a place inside your mind, somewhere safe. Shelley, are you listening? Shelley? But Shelley couldn't hear him because she had already clicked her ruby slippers, spoken the special words, and ended up in her own backyard. She lay on the trampoline as Mark and Joey jumped all around her, laughing and teasing. How about this one, Mom? Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Mark clapped a hand over Joey's mouth before he could answer, and they fell to the tramp laughing. That was rush hour, she answered. James raped her. He violated her, causing as much pain as possible. He was brutal like an animal, but it didn't matter because she wasn't there. I've got one, Mark laughed. We're going to need a bigger boat. Jaws, Shelley answered easily. Here come the sharks, Joey yelled as he and Mark jumped on her and tried to gobble her up. Ouch! Come on, guys, don't really bite. Ow! You guys get off. You're hurting Mommy. Ouch, Mark, your head just hit me in the mouth. Okay, boys, off. Get off. Get off now. She came reluctantly back to reality. James had gotten off. It had been his teeth that bit. It had been his fist that hit her mouth. Answer me, he screamed. She had no idea what the question was, but she nodded anyway, and it seemed to appease him. James stood in front of Eric, gloating. He said something to Eric, which Shelley couldn't hear, but whatever it was, Eric became enraged and lurched toward him. There was so much pain on Eric's face, and Shelley closed her eyes against it, causing her to focus on her own feelings. The thought of James's seed now mingling with her own flesh was repulsive and sickening, and she fought down a wave of nausea as she wondered how much longer this would go on and what else James had planned. The fear of what was to come was much worse than what had just happened. And Shelley realized She didn't feel the way she had once before. When she'd been raped before, it had seemed like it was the end of the world. It wasn't, though. Now she knew. She understood that her body was just a body, a house for her life force, yes, but a mere mortal body. She hadn't let him touch her mind. She wasn't responsible for his actions. She was not a victim. He'd done his worst, and yet she didn't feel like a victim. He was bigger and stronger, and that was too bad for her, but he didn't get to her no matter how hard he tried. "Well, that was a nice beginning," James said, approaching the bed. He climbed on again and knelt across her abdomen. "But now the pleasure is over. It's time to get down to business." The knife appeared in his hand again, and Shelley's respiration doubled, tripled. Maybe he hadn't done his worst. Maybe what lay ahead of her was helping her to put the rape into perspective, because now she definitely wished that rape was the only thing that would happen. "Did you know that the flesh on the inside of your arms, from your elbow to your underarm, is some of the most sensitive?" She obediently shook her head. "No? Well, it is. But you don't have to take my word for it, because you're about to find out firsthand." "No, no," Eric said, panic in his voice. "Don't do this. James, please don't do this." James smiled at him, and Eric suddenly realized it. He'd been saying just exactly what James wanted to hear, giving him exactly what he wanted. Eric, even trying to reason with James, was ridiculous, and he knew it. Yet if he stopped pleading, would he do worse to Shelley, to make him start again? And he could do worse. He could do much worse. James turned back to Shelley, leaning over her. He touched the point of the knife to the soft skin of Shelley's underarm, just above the elbow. Her eyes pleaded with him. He pushed the blade into her skin. She gasped in pain and fear as blood ran over the curve of her bicep and onto the white sheet. James turned to watch Eric's expression. Rage and horror were emanating from him. Slowly, James inched the knife downward through her skin as she screamed her pain. When he finished, there was a neat incision, a 1/16 of an inch deep and 6 inches long, ending just above her armpit. And she lay sobbing uncontrollably. Eric twisted and turned his wrists until they were bloody, and he thought his hands would break off. Helpless. He was helpless to rescue the woman he loved, just like he'd been with Anne. He'd wanted to fight the cancer for her, but he'd been helpless. At least the cancer hadn't been his fault, but this time it was his fault. This innocent woman suffered. It was his fault, and there was nothing he could do. James ran his hand over the wound, smearing the blood evenly over her arm. Okay. It's over," he said, trying to soothe her. "Come on now, stop crying. Shh, it's over. Oh, come on now, Shelley. How bad can it be?" He sat waiting for her tears to subside. When they finally did, he spoke again. "Better now?" he asked. She nodded pitifully. He smiled. "Good. Because it's time to do the other arm." James couldn't hear the words Eric was yelling over Shelley's screams as he sliced through the skin of her other arm, and even when he finished, she continued to cry hysterically. "Calm down now," he coaxed kindly. She ignored him. He decided to distract her. He dipped his fingers in the blood along one of the wounds and began using it to write words on her belly. "Hey, Shelley," he said cheerfully, trying to get her attention. "Tell me you remember this." She lifted her head to see the words, even though she already knew what it said. "Too easy." "Ah, yeah, those were the good old days, weren't they, Shell?" She turned her head and retched violently. The food James had forced her to eat earlier came back up, and he was extremely annoyed. "Now look what you've done. What a mess," he said with disgust. He began jerking off the bedclothes until she lay on the bare mattress, and he left the room. Eric immediately tried to communicate with her, but she wouldn't listen to him because she was afraid the temptation to tell him how much she loved him, or to answer his questions, or to try to comfort him would be too great. James returned carrying clean sheets. He made the bed underneath her. "Now behave," he ordered. "There are no more sheets. If you mess these up, I'll have to punish you." Punish her? Eric realized the man had completely lost it. Everything he did was illogical. He'd crossed over into insanity. And Shelley nodded her acceptance as if she completely understood his logic. Somehow James didn't seem so crazy anymore. Maybe it was because she joined him in his realm of insanity. James continued the game. He made parallel incisions to the first ones on her arms and then moved down to do the same to the inside of her thighs. She tried to kick, but he merely locked her knee under his arm and went to it. With each scream, Eric died a little more inside. Dear Jesus. How much more can she take? Please help her. He tried to use the cuffs to saw through the rope above his head, but the rope was much too thick. Using every bit of his power to jerk his legs upward, he tried to pull the cuffs free from where they were nailed to the floor. His ankles bloody, he still wouldn't give up. After each cut, James consoled Shelley until she was quiet and ready to experience the next one. It was strange, but she found herself looking forward to the times when he comforted her. It was, at the least, a respite from the pain. He began working on her hands, making tiny slices through each fingertip and then a larger one across her palm. She found that she had no more tears to cry. She simply moaned or grunted with each cut. She gave into it. She opened her mind and allowed herself to completely experience the utter agony, misery, and pain of her situation. She wallowed in her own blood, wet and sticky. She was cold, dizzy, and nauseated, and she looked over at Eric. Tears streaked his cheeks, and she thought from the look of agony on his face that his pain was much worse than hers. After all, she knew were the situation reversed, she wouldn't be able to handle watching his torture. He still struggled against his bonds, but she knew it was futile. James finished with her hands and was consoling her again. He stood. He was gazing down at her, shaking his head slowly. Well, I have to say, sweet Shelley, that I never thought you'd make it this far. You're a very brave woman. You have my respect. She smiled a faint smile. I want you to know that you've saved Eric's life. A bigger smile. Alerted by that statement, Eric stopped trying to pull his feet free and raised his head. So, this wasn't just torture for the pure enjoyment of it. James was putting Shelley through some sort of a test of bravery perhaps, and maybe if she passed then James would spare Eric's life. But what about Shelley's life? And that question was answered within the next few moments. Are you happy now that you've won the game? James asked, brushing some of her blood-soaked hair from her face. She nodded. Well, the game isn't quite finished, though, Shelley. The relief she'd been experiencing disappeared and her lips trembling. Are you in a lot of pain? He asked her. She nodded. I bet you want this all to be over, don't you? She nodded. And you know Eric will live, right? She nodded and then smiled up at Eric. And I suppose you're smart enough to also know that you're not going to have the same privilege. Her smile faded. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she'd known all along that James meant for her to give her life for Eric, and she was willing to do just that. Yet hearing him speak the dreaded words struck fear in her heart. He slapped her again. You do know you're going to die, right? She nodded slowly. But I'll tell you what, I'll make you another deal. You don't have to die. All you have to do is say the words. Just say, I want to live, and I swear to you that I will let you go. Say it! Eric screamed at her. She closed her eyes. It was a trick. He hadn't said the game was over. Please, baby, say the words, Eric pleaded. She shook her head. James smiled. Damn, you're a good woman. I really hate to do this. Please understand, it's nothing personal. Eric is safe, but one of you has to die for my Anne, and so that means you have to go, Shelley. James touched Shelley's chest. Do you want me to get it over with quickly? I mean, it's the least I can do for such a brave woman. She nodded, forcing herself to avoid Eric's eyes and trying desperately to block out his words. James' hand stopped moving and came to rest over Shelley's heart. Your heart is here. I'll push the knife in hard, and it will hurt like hell for just a few moments, but then it will all be over. Okay? She glanced once more at Eric, who continued to struggle with his bonds. Looking back to James, she nodded bravely. James raised the knife high, and Shelley's breaths came in great gasps. She couldn't control her fear. She wasn't brave. She was a coward. She held her breath and waited. James looked over at Eric, who had gone completely berserk, struggling with all his might and power to release himself from his bindings. James smiled. Eric's agony was the absolute pure pleasure James had looked forward to for years. Eric was truly suffering. Too bad Tommy couldn't be around to share in the entertainment. But then suddenly James realized something. That once Shelley's life had been extinguished, there would be no more pleasure. It'd be over. He decided to prolong the fun a little longer. He lowered the knife. And Shelley began to cry again, for this was the cruelest game of all. Just do it, she thought. Just get it over with. I can't take any more. Shelley, have you ever heard of harakiri? Some people call it harikari. She sniffed and nodded. Wouldn't you really prefer to do this yourself? Think about it now. If you do it yourself, you deprive me of the pleasure and you commit the final act of supreme bravery. Don't you agree? Slowly, she nodded. No, Shelley, Eric bellowed at her. She ignored him. James cut the tape holding Shelley's wrist to the bedpost. He helped her lower her arms and move them around until the feeling returned and she was able to move them on her own. Eric knew the motive for this new twist was only to add to his grief. Would she really do it? Her hands were free. Could he get her to take advantage of that? And if so, how? She was so weak from loss of blood. What could she do against someone as large as James? James placed the knife in her hands as he straddled her abdomen. He closed her bloody palms around the hilt. Okay now, Shelley, it's all up to you. Anytime you're ready. She held the knife poised for a long time, breath coming faster and faster. She tried to decide which one would be the last. Several times she started to lower the knife, but something stopped her. James was becoming impatient. Shelley, I have a plane to catch. Get a move on. He looked up at Eric with a sneer. Women, he said with a smile and a wink. Shelley tried again. She brought the knife down to the spot on her chest that James had showed her. She touched the tip to her skin, and a tiny drop of blood appeared at the point. No, Shelley, you have to do it hard. I mean, like get up speed and plunge it in. You can do it. However, Eric was also giving her directions. Never give up, Shelley. Killing yourself would be giving up. There is no sense to it. Baby, please, you have to listen to me. There would be no use for him to suggest she turn the knife around and use it on James. He'd be able to block her, and then he might go crazy and kill her accidentally. No, if she just listened to him, just stall, because the nails holding the cuffs to the floor moved slightly. Another few minutes, and he'd have it. She closed her eyes again. Shelley, I am your teacher, and you're being disrespectful. That got her attention, and James frowned. Please, baby, Eric pleaded. It wasn't meant to end like this. I know it wasn't. How could it? There's been too many miracles. His words struck a chord in Shelley's heart and mind. How could everything she'd been through, everything she'd accomplished, be meant to lead to this? Why would she find Eric and happiness only to have it taken from her? And the baby, the miracle of their child. Eric was right. It wasn't meant to end like this. It just couldn't be. James took the knife from Shelley. Sorry, you had your chance. I'm running out of time. Got to get this over with. He raised the knife. Well, it wasn't supposed to end like this, but it looked like it was going to. She blinked a farewell to Eric. Don't give up, he said calmly, quietly. So quietly, in fact, that she looked again to see if his mouth truly moved. Had he spoken at all? Don't give up. The words came again, but not from Eric. They seemed to come from inside her own head. She glanced around, but how could she escape? She was weak and stiff and no match for James, even at her best. It was over. There was no way out. She'd be dead soon, and along with her, Eric's child. James had said he wouldn't hurt the children. They were innocent, and yet he was about to take the life of a tiny baby he didn't even know existed. And her eyes lit up. He didn't know. She looked up at him quickly. The knife was coming down, and she drew a painful breath. You said you wouldn't hurt the children. He stopped. And so? And so, I'm pregnant. The words stunned him, and the knife stopped. Compassion overcame him. It was only a brief moment, but it was long enough, and with a final jerk, Eric sent nails flying and threw his cuffed legs up and over James's head. And at the same time, Shelley placed her hands over James's and thrust the knife forward, and it slid deep into his abdomen. She hadn't expected the sick feeling that came from the slicing of human flesh and muscle. She almost felt sorry for him as his look of compassion for her unborn child turned to total surprise and confusion. Eric had no such qualms. He yanked his legs back, pulling James off Shelley with every intention of snapping his neck. Shelley rolled to the floor and rose to stand in front of Eric. She reached for his hands, not knowing how to unlock the cuffs. No, don't bother with that now. Run, baby, run, Eric pleaded, struggling to hold James in a headlock using his feet and the chain of the cuffs. Run and hide. For once, she did as she was told without hesitation. There were several hundred miles between the bedroom and the front door of the cabin. She covered them in only a few hours. And when she finally opened the cabin door and burst through to the porch, it was like she'd been madly swimming to the surface of the ocean and finally sprang forth. She sucked in clean, fresh air. James's confusion turned quickly to fury. Eric jerked his legs, causing James's head to snap back. The chink was trying to kill him. It's not going to be that easy. Pulling the blood-soaked knife from his own stomach, he reached up and plunged it into Eric's thigh. Grimacing through the pain, Eric tensed the muscles in his legs, trying desperately to keep hold of his captive. When James stabbed Eric's thigh again, he lost some of his strength, and James was able to scramble free, and he rose and started for the door. Come back here and face me, you coward, Eric demanded. Oh, you think you can trick me into staying here and fighting with you, and all the while she's getting away? You think you can keep me from finishing what I started? I could kill you right now. I should. But I want her to see it. He turned to run. Oh, don't you worry. We'll be back. And when we get here, you'll be the one to die. You want to know why? He grinned. Because she spoke. She lost the game. She chose to save herself over you. She chose to save the baby, Eric reminded him, hoping he'll keep true to his distorted version of honor and not hurt the children. James turned and staggered out of the room. Shelley ran. She ran blindly, her bare feet numbed to pain, covered familiar ground. The path she chose was home to her, and joy sprang from every step. She was free. She thought she'd never again be able to use her legs and arms, and yet here she was running. She thought never again to feel the wind on her face, and yet her hair blew back like the tail of a kite. Freedom. Its taste was like the most exquisite delicacy. It was indescribable. She could hear James's crashing steps. She had no idea, no plan as to how to avoid recapture. She should hide somewhere, but if he couldn't find her, he'd probably go back and kill Eric. Her body was weak and no match for the smallest of enemies, yet since she tasted freedom once more, she felt inspired to fight. She had to save Eric. She had to try. Better to die as a warrior. Soon she would have to stop running and turn and fight. New scene. Sort of. Eric struggled helplessly. Run and hide, baby, he whispered. Shelley was free, yet the torture continued. Not knowing what was happening was almost as painful as being witness to it. There was a sound. One of them was returning. Too quiet to be James, it must be Shelley. The door burst open. Not Shelley. 3 strong men rushed in. They had him free in moments. We have to find Shelley, Eric stated as he got his bearings and moved for the door. Without even 1 second of hesitation, the 4 flew out of the cabin, Ricky's speed putting him in the lead. New scene. She couldn't run any farther. He had to stop. She couldn't breathe. She veered off the path desperately, looking for something to use as a weapon. She spotted a branch the size of a large baseball bat. Stumbling forward, she picked it up quickly and slipped behind a nearby tree. Calming herself, she tried to get her breathing under control. She tried to clear her brain. She was dizzy and weak from loss of blood and knew she was moving slowly. It seemed like only a few moments had passed before she heard the sound of heavy footsteps stumbling toward her. Her pulse quickened. She closed her eyes. Aim for the head. She stepped out and swung. She timed it better this time than with Eric earlier, but her aim was off. The branch caught him across the chest. He stumbled backward but grabbed at the branch, and before she could draw it back and swing again, he jerked it from her grasp. She turned to run, but he lurched for her, and they tumbled to the ground together. He moved quickly, considering the gash in his stomach. He tried to pin her down, but she found she had a small advantage. Completely naked and covered with perspiration and blood, she easily slipped from his grasp and sprinted away while he struggled to stand. Shelley knew she needed a place of advantage from which to fight, but her mind, dulled from her painful torture, wouldn't let her think. Yet it seemed a voice called out to her, "The rock. The rock. Go to the rock." Her logic fought against it. There's no way to defend yourself there. Go deeper into the woods. Yet the giant boulder called out to her again and again, and her body moved toward it instinctively. She stumbled breathlessly into the clearing where the large rock loomed in front of her. It sat alone and barren, the rushing stream splashing up against it. Meanwhile, Ricky literally flew down the path he knew Shelley would take. The others were barely able to keep up, feet hardly touching the earth. Ricky's mind flashed with the scene he just witnessed. The bed had been covered with blood. Blood he assumed to be Shelley's. She'd gotten away somehow, but what kind of condition would she be in? There had been too much blood. The others had been falling farther and farther behind, Justin having to help Eric at times, but then Ricky came to an abrupt halt. "What is it?" Jason asked breathlessly as they reached him. Ricky didn't answer. He looked off to the right and pointed out, "I think Shelley left the path." Of course, Jason could see the clues now that Ricky pointed them out. Shelley had left the path. There had been a scuffle, blood-spattered leaves and pine straw. The trail led back toward the path at an angle through the woods. Drawing on all his reserves, Eric took the lead, and they skimmed bushes and fallen trees as they continued their pursuit. Then they heard a scream, and they would have picked up their pace were it possible to go any faster. New scene. Shelley stood on the bank staring at the rock. She couldn't see how it could offer her any protection, and she looked off to the right to decide which way to run. Only James had caught up to her, and his hand grasped her shoulders. She screamed and pulled away, dashing toward her precious rock with James at her heels. She jumped the few feet of water and scrambled up the side of the boulder. James grabbed an ankle, but she kicked him and tried to back away, readying to kick him again when he reached for her. And he laughed and eased his large frame onto the side of the rock. "Got you now, girl." There was no time for a defensive answer. The boulder shifted under James's weight. It rolled toward him. He should have been able to simply jump aside, but he was weak from his abdominal wound, and as he tried, he lost footing on the slippery moss. James fell backward into the icy water, and the sleeping giant rolled over onto him, crushing his legs. Shelley leapt away as the rock rolled, adding to its momentum. She landed in the water and scrambled to her feet. She stood horrified, watching what had once been her fate become his, only he was in no danger of drowning. He reached out for her. "Help me," he ordered harshly. She stood paralyzed. This man had tried to kill her, had tortured her, raped her, and he asked for help. She took a step back. James' face changed suddenly, though. It softened. His blue eyes blinked slowly as he looked up into Shelley's face. There was pain and sorrow, and she began to wonder what could have happened to this man in his life to cause him to become so hate-filled and violent. Had he been abused as a child? What could have fed his hatred for so many years? What turns what must have once been a sweet-faced, blue-eyed little boy into a monster? His words broke her abstraction. "Please, Shelley, help me. I'm sorry." Their eyes met. Sorry. Sorry? How could he think that sorry would be able to compensate for all he'd done? Yet he did look sorry. Sorry and sad and utterly miserable. Could she forgive him? How could she not? Who was she to forgive or not forgive? What should she do? What had she learned during the course of the year? Well, she'd learned to be strong in the face of adversity, to not give up when all seems lost, that things are not always black and white. There's good and evil in everyone. Eric taught her that Jesus said to forgive your enemy, those who do evil against you. James had definitely done that. She had also learned from her extraordinary teacher to have honor and courage, and that honor and courage meant to do what one thinks is the right thing to do, even when one is scared to death to do it. "Please, Shelley, take my hand and pull me out." She stepped shakily forward and then stopped. What was she doing? Was she falling for a trick? And even if she could get him out from under the rock, and she seriously doubted she could, would he be capable of harming her again? Not probable. His legs were crushed, so he couldn't run after her. He had to be weak from loss of blood, she thought, glancing down at his abdominal wound, the blood mixing with the water. He reminded her of a wounded animal, scared and confused, accepting help from the enemy. Would it be honorable to allow him to suffer and die without even trying to help? Even though she herself was weak, she moved forward and braced herself against the rock. She pushed with all the strength she had left, straining, breathing hard, but it didn't budge. She stepped back and shook her head at him. I can't. I'm sorry. I tried, but I can't move it." She thought she saw anger flash across his features, but No, he was smiling. I know it's too heavy for you to move, Shelley, but if you'll come take my hands, I know together we can get me out. Silently, she moved to his side and gingerly took his outstretched hand in hers. She shuddered, because his hands were so large. They gripped her tightly around the wrist, and she began to pull, but he only laughed. Shelley, you didn't really think you could pull me out, did you? Her eyes filled with turmoil. No, Shelley, I'm going to die here. He laughed again. And so are you. It's not how I wanted it to end. You weren't supposed to speak, but you did, didn't you? That meant Eric dies, and I wanted to go back and let you witness Eric's death. She tried to pull away, but his grip was like a vice. He jerked on her arms, and she came face down into the water. She struggled to get her knees up under her and lift her head. She gasped for breath. He released his grip on one of her wrists and twisted his fingers through the back of her hair until her head was secured snugly in his grip, and he held her face close to his. You messed up the game, Shelley. You weren't supposed to speak. He plunged her face down into the stream. She struggled to find footing, pushing her hands against him. Any second her lungs would explode. Miraculously, he raised her head, and she inhaled deeply. Reaching back, she groped for his hand at the back of her head, trying to loosen his fingers from her hair. He shook her until she was still, and their eyes met. He was crying. You messed everything up, Shelley, he blubbered again. And then there was rage. His free hand balled into a fist and began hammering at her head. Each blow enunciated his words. You, bam, weren't, bam, supposed to, bam, speak. He said the words over and over. Each blow echoed through her brain. She stopped struggling. Her hands fell loosely by her side. James' grip now was the only thing holding her up out of the water. He shook her until, in a daze, she looked into his face. Goodbye, Shelley, he said softly. The knife she had earlier buried in his abdomen now appeared in his free hand. As if fascinated by what was happening, she watched him as he held her head fast and placed the tip of the knife against her throat. A few minutes ago, she'd been at a safe distance watching his demise. She was stupid. So stupid. You made me do it, he said. You made me have to hurt your baby. New scene. As Ricky emerged from the woods into the clearing, instinct took over completely. There was a knife at Shelley's throat. She'd lost all fight. He pulled his knife from his side. His eyes met his father's. Still running, Ricky tossed the golden knife to the only man he knew who was better than him with the weapon. The movement was fluid, beautiful in a way. The man, at full speed, hair blowing in the wind, catches the knife in mid-stride, draws back, and sends it airborne. The weapon hurtles toward its target. The shiny gold and steel flashes in the sun as the blade tumbles end over end, nearing its destination. Eric hadn't thought. He merely acted on pure instinct and adrenaline. Shelley waited for the final sting when something strange happened. Another knife appeared directly in front of her face. It seemed to appear out of nowhere. As if by magic, a golden, intricately carved hilt of a knife seemed to be protruding from James's chest. Slowly, her eyes moved from the golden-handled knife to James's face. It was blank. No emotion. Nothing. Dead. The knife that had been at her throat simply fell away. The hand that held her head up fell limply by James's side, bringing her down with it. She floundered in the water, struggling to free her hair from his fingers. She tried to free herself, but there was another pair of hands. Gasping, she gained her freedom and stumbled backwards away from the stranger's hands. She scrambled to her feet and stood shaking, confused, trying desperately to comprehend what had taken place. There was someone there, someone speaking. She glanced around. A man approached. She backed away, gazing at him blankly. He was stepping toward her, and she turned to her left, looking for an avenue of escape, but there stood another man. Was it another trick, she thought? Shelley, it's me, baby. Let me help you, Eric said softly. She tried to focus. James had pounded on her brain. Everything seemed blurry and distorted. Eric slowly reached out to Shelley. A pale, ghostly figure of a woman stood naked and shivering before him. A long, tangled, bloody, wet mat of curls covered her face. The open wounds on her arms and legs were long, angry red streaks. He looked into her face. It was as if she didn't recognize him. Her eyes darted back and forth in distrust. But finally, they settled on him, and he knew the moment she finally recognized him. Shelley's eyes widened as she realized who stood before her. Eric. He moved toward her, speaking softly, a voice like distant rolling thunder. He stopped a few feet from her, blood ran down his leg. He's hurt, was her first thought. He's alive and free, was her second. She stepped toward him, and quickly he covered the remaining inches. They stood face to face, staring into one another's souls, reveling in the sheer realization that they'd both survived. But shock and fatigue kept Shelley from expressing her joy. She merely leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. As always, the power and warmth that was his became hers as it flowed into and around her body. Her trembling ceased and she began to relax, and she looked up as Eric carefully brushed her hair back from her face. "You're alive." The words were said simultaneously. They smiled at each other. "It's over," Eric added. "Let's go home." Eric scooped her up into his arms and turned to carry her to safety, but stumbled, weak from the stab wounds to his back and thigh. But immediately they were surrounded by three of the most powerful, loyal people the world had ever known. Those three saw Eric and Shelley and their tiny unborn child safely home. Luke chapter 6, verse 27. "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you." Epilogue. It took a few days for Eric and Shelley to emerge from their stupor. The first half of that time was spent in a hospital recovering physically. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, Shelley was a changed person. She'd had to reach deep down inside herself in order to survive and found a strength she'd never known. She'd had to learn to trust God, and in doing so, she'd blended with a divine light of peace and love, and it no longer mattered what had been done to her body, for her life source, her spirit and soul, remained unaffected. She discovered Eric had been right all those months ago when he'd suggested that a person is only a victim if they allow themselves to be. Shelley had found a spirituality and a peace she never knew existed. It was as if in her deepest agony she discovered another entire dimension. That dimension was the realm of heaven, God's realm, and he had filled her soul with love and peace and harmony, and that was where she dwelled. Eric had reached inside himself many years before he'd ever met Shelley, and yet, watching her suffer, terrified he would lose another loved one, he'd had to let go and find peace once more. As far as James Crane was concerned, Eric had done what he'd had to do, and even though he felt sorrow over the waste of a human life, he felt no guilt. He hadn't acted in vengeance. He protected his wife and child. His heart was filled only with love and light. And the next 6 months were spent decorating the nursery and adjusting to the new home, the kids adjusting to a new school, and each member of the family adjusting to each other. They prayed together often, attended church together, several different ones. They worked on being centered and overcoming trauma. However, by the time Shelley was 8 months along in her pregnancy, she'd begun to feel stifled and trapped inside her cumbersome body. Against Eric's better judgment, she talked him into a family camping trip into the canyon. She'd been so miserable, Eric would have done anything for her. So, as he'd done once before, he packed up the boys and Ricky and Bree and headed out to become one with nature. Surrounded by large trees, Shelley felt wonderful being able to commune with nature again, as they had at the cabin in the North Georgia mountains. Nevertheless, it didn't surprise Eric when she slipped on some rocks in the creek and put herself into an early labor. Not panicked, it was a simple matter to pack up camp and head back. Or it should have been. They left in the middle of a downpour and found the bridge out. And taking cover in a ranger station, it seemed fate would bring the baby to them in true Shelley fashion. With the entire family around and cheering her on, a tiny baby girl was pushed into a cold, wet world. Shelley wanted to name her daughter after the dandelions, but the kids begged her not to do that to the poor child. And as a compromise was made, and June Flower Keno was welcomed into the family with open arms. God had a plan all along. Eric Keno was led to find a woman in need of healing from several things: a rough childhood, an emotionally abusive marriage, and the trauma of rape. He had no idea things would turn out as they did, but being in service to God, he faithfully took each step. At times it had been difficult to understand why God sent them down a path strewn with so many obstacles. why he allowed the trials and the tribulations that they'd had to face. Yet God, in his infinite wisdom, knows just how to hone his warriors. But why do his warriors have to be so very strong? Well, our Father knows what's coming. Trust him. Find out his will for your life and work very hard on what he's showing you. You may not see the whole path, only the first few feet, but walk there in faith. When Shelley was raped, she was unable to get past it until God put it into perspective for her. There are some scars, yet she's strong now, strong and calm and at peace and filled with joy. And that is the healing blessing pronounced upon all who read this book. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Mark chapter 5, verse 34. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." And that is the end of D&D number 1, A Healing in Jesus' Name. And I hope I will join you at book number 2. It takes a completely different track, but all the people in each book are very important, and they all come together in the end books, about, I'd say, 8 through 14. Catch you on the flip side. Oh, and by the way, if you will like or comment or share this book or go to the website and make a comment about this book, that would be awesome, and it will help others to find it. That's what I'm told anyway. Have an awesome day.